that's all for the yeah, and I would stimulate that. Hi, Ted. How are you?
So I'm supposed to give a presentation tomorrow on pharmacy prices.
Yes. You can see that there's an outside world, for instance. They're having to dodge construction. Yeah. Remind me why we don't meet here always.
I think we're gonna meet here always. I mean, maybe at the start of the new year, but we are officially switched over. They're getting some new technology. Yeah. Even better than what they have now. Yeah. Hi everyone, this is the meeting of the Oregon Health Policy Board. We're a little bit delayed, so we're going to keep you on mute and we'll unmute you when the meeting begins. Yes. Bill, let me be the one that told you.
Okay.
Yeah. He said he got it.
It's very
There you go. See, yeah.
that's it. Just I'm not there. The real drivers of narrow hospitals can't wait. Big driver in Oregon. I'm not there. Plus I was losing because like she's a professional lobbyist. I just like background lawyer. So but we did
anniversary celebration.
So did you start driving to the right place, wrong place?
Did I go where?
You were at the wrong place, yeah. I was waiting for the train at Urban Center to go down to South Waterfront. I just check a different day. I just checked my phone. Yeah, thank God for Uber. Where? We need some rain. The weather's nice. Sun's nice, but it's really strange not to have more rain this time of year. Portland is the new San Francisco. San Francisco's the new LA.
I love talking to people about interesting. They actually, now that you're on, are you on that? doctors, they just had it, it doesn't matter. How do you have the Did you pick up the word fiduciary? Or are you aware of it there? Okay. Because I haven't heard it. I mean, very appropriate.
Yes.
But I haven't heard somebody say it just like that.
I actually picked it up getting that. I thought the insurance had the responsibility.
Of course, the insurance company probably says that they're responsible.
Oh, great.
Said to me, James, come back. Put that concept, the book goes down.
We don't want to talk about trust or last bit of words or why do you think these words? Maybe it's because it's used now.
You look like you know what you're doing.
Well, I don't know what this is like.
Try shutting this out.
That is why it's
They don't have that.
Don't get me started.
Happy belated birthday, by the way.
My birthday's actually on Halloween.
Oh, I saw on Facebook about your 40th birthday party. Was it an early celebration?
I did have a surprise 40th birthday
Okay.
party over the weekend.
Okay, that's what I saw. A happy early birthday.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, so it's weird.
You're always just ahead. Always ahead.
I just think
planning ahead.
Well, she put it on the 13th because Halloween is such a big time for us.
Like have about second grade.
So there's something on the
It sounds like you're losing your voice. I also have a cold. Don't say anything.
That's why we've been isolated to this.
Here's a sick part.
I have this thing. And I'm really talked in.
So you're just noticing it.
Yeah.
I sound different. You don't talk to yourself or you're getting ready in the morning to pump yourself up. You're like, let's go.
I like shadow boxing. No, that doesn't help when you're running. That would be amazing if it did that.
You're like, I can't have this baby split.
Today. I went to that. That would be so funny.
I was there.
That looks great. Because I don't think I even though we have to run.
Good, are you?
These are really terrible.
I guess, Okay, I guess I'll get us started. Give me a second to We'll go ahead and get the Oregon Health Policy Board meeting for October 15th started. Thanks, everyone. Sorry, I was over at our other location. Don't worry, the OHSU building is looking great.
I should have stuck around. I would get a better ride
Yeah.
with you.
So we have an important but probably somewhat shortened meeting today. Most of our focus will be, as it has been, on our CCO 2.0 process, and we anticipate taking some action today on our report. So looking forward to that conversation. Before that, we'll hear from Director Allen, and we'll also hear from Director Johnson of the Office of Equity and Inclusion around the Health Equity Committee membership recommendation. And let's see, so a couple things we want to do before we jump into all that. One is we have to approve our minutes from the last meeting. So we should pull those out, and I would entertain a motion for those minutes.
Motion approved.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we would approve the minutes from the last meeting. Is there any discussion on the minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes for the September meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Great. And it sounds like we've got Dr. McKelvey on the phone with us. Is that true?
Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks, Carla. You do this better than most, but make sure to let us know when you want to jump into the conversation. Okay, second thing is, so we have you may remember at our last meeting, we were coming to the end of our long-range calendar because it only went through the end of this year. And it has now been extended out through the next year. For the most part, what's identified currently is kind of work that is running concurrent to other things and that requires our kind of action or attention. I will point out that we're still tentatively planning I'm on the third, or let's see, the fourth page. Tentatively planning a out-of-area meeting for December 4th of this year. Looks like Albany is in consideration currently. And then we'll once again have our retreat in January, and we will be at Portland State, or we think we'll be at Texas.
So maybe we'll be in the Portland area, it may not be at Portland
We'll
State.
be in the Portland area. We are looking at Portland State and other options.
Portland State University,
Portland State University.
as opposed to Portland State Office Building.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Any questions about the long-range calendar? Yeah.
Yeah, Zeke, I just wanted to mention I've been on the HB 4005 work group and on the Universal Coverage work group. And I think their final products are going to be done in November. And I think will be worthwhile discussing in December or January. The 4005 process has just been incredible. It is really interesting, our process. We'll see what.
That's the pharmacy transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I was also sitting on the healthcare cost review task force, as was Jeremy, and that has a finalized product, so it's probably a good idea to figure out how to get each of those in front of the board in a timely fashion. Thanks. Any other comments or thoughts about the long-range calendar? Excellent. Okay. One other thing, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bainsberg for a minute, who would like to share a bit about the Public Health Advisory Board's work.
Thank you, Zeke. Just want to make a comment we have the subcommittee digest here, and I think it's very helpful and a very efficient way to summarize the meetings. But I just wanted to call out something that happened at the last Public Health Advisory Board, where we heard reports from several modernization grants that demonstrated successful partnerships between CCOs and local health authorities. And I just wanted to call that out because we've had a lot of discussions here about the importance of moving upstream to population level health, and that this idea is more than just a theory. It's actually been put in practice successfully. Clackamas County with Family Care, in Lincoln County with Intercommunity Health, and Trillium, as well as Deschutes with Pacific Central Oregon, each had public health modernization grants looking at tobacco cessation and had very successful partnerships with really strong outcomes for a modest amount of money. And I think it's really just important to recognize that this is not just, this is proof of concept for a really important policy component of CCO 2.0, specifically policy number 8. And I just have a lot of confidence that this policy number 8 that requires CCOs to partner with local authorities would be successful. So I'd like to congratulate these CCOs and these local health authorities for testing this idea, you know, and giving us the confidence that that's really going to be a powerful piece of the policy going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bangsberg. I think that's a good it's a good foretelling to a role that we can play as a board as we move forward on the CCO 2.0 work. I'm really excited about our using this platform as a space where we can make visible some of those great things that are happening across the state as we continue to move. So we don't have mics, and Dana, will you do me a favor and kind of give me like a, I can hear you, I can't hear you? Thanks. I think the room is pretty well designed to focus sound that direction, but just for those of you on the phone and then also for us up here, we should be cognizant of the fact that it may be a little bit harder to hear than usual. One other quick thing I just wanted to note, I just happened to hear on the radio, maybe others did as well, that our friends in Klamath County, including the CCO, who was really involved, were awarded a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize, one of 4 communities across the country to receive that prize, very much focused on their effort and intent to both look at and try to address social determinants of health, but also just an acknowledgement that the county has had pretty significant disparities around health, both in the context of the state and nationally, and that community has really come together in a meaningful way that I think is really representative of a lot of the, both the intent of CCOs, but also the focus that we've had in the past couple of years in our coordinated care process. So congratulations to Klamath County and all the folks that were involved in that. Jeremy?
And Zeke, just a reminder, the Gorge was a awardee of that award 2 years ago as well. So really impressive that there's only 4 here, and we've had 2 communities in less than 3 years that have received it already.
Thanks, Jeremy. Great. Okay. With that, do we have any public testimony? So we ask folks, thank you, for public testimony to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. I'll give you a sense of what the time frame is. We have one person signed up, Amy Smith from AOC. Andy. I was going to say, hey Andy.
Good morning.
Your 3 minutes start when you start.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Smith. I work for the Association of Oregon Counties. We represent all of Oregon's county commissioners, 128 across the state. And this morning, AOC would like to take the opportunity to recognize the significant work of OHA, the depth and quality of the work in CCO 2.0, the final report. And in particular, there are 3 things around issues of behavioral health that we wanted to highlight and complement. First, and this is in your packet, this is the long final report on page 16, but I'll summarize it for you. There's a question about the role of CCOs and the local mental health authority and the issue of delegation and ownership and accountability. So we think that this report and the particular language that's on page 16 that OHA really got it right. You kind of threaded a needle, so to speak. This relationship between counties and the local mental health authority will continue to evolve, but certainly there was some discussion and certainly a challenge immediately about how to take this next step forward. So the language that I thought in particular seemed to do this well, OHA changed the policy from requiring CCOs to clearly own the behavioral health benefit to requiring CCOs to be accountable for the behavioral health benefit of their members and not fully transfer the benefit to another entity. So what this really, I think, is saying that there is this dance going on and that there's this constant relationship that will not go away between your safety net and these local critical services, including your public safety system, that will continue to have to kind of find that harmony moving forward. So thank you for that. On page 23 of the report, there, OHA, the report highlights kind of challenges related to behavioral health. So these are themes that have been about for some time, but the ones that jumped out a little bit, some of those themes would be the issues of cumbersome access, transitions of care, and navigation issues. Of course, you all know this, but it's just important that the report does highlight these as ongoing challenges. And this is particular to behavioral health. There's some administrative billing barriers that are unique to behavioral health. The workforce issue, the report notes that it's not robust enough in behavioral health, and that continues to be, those are huge issues. And then there's also a noted point around rates for behavioral health are insufficient. So those are big pieces of work, but I think the report highlights those, which is very important. Then my last point on page 25 and 26, as you know, the first CCO, there's a relationship between CCOs and local mental health authorities, community mental health programs in an MOU. And the report highlights the significance of that. These have to be, again, working relationships. They can't kind of be an exercise in drafting the MOU and then kind of leaving it. So for those three reasons, our commissioners really wanted to thank Jeremy, especially for your work, Jeremy, but all of your team, Mr. Allen, and thank you for an excellent report, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Great. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Allen.
Great, thank you. Just very briefly, two key recruitments are hopefully entering the home stretch. We're down to finalist conversations for both a behavioral health director and a Medicaid director. Of course, once we finish those, then we'll be recruiting the deputy positions in both of those. So quite a bit of horsepower that we're going to be adding in the next short while. But I'm hopeful that we'll be able to conclude both of those, at least in terms of a decision by the end of this month. Have some introductions from them, and then we'll need to figure out start dates and all those kinds of things. That's all I have today.
All right. Zipping through. Questions for Director Allen? Thanks.
There you
go. Great. So we're running quick, but I see Leanne is here, which is great. So we'll move to the next item, which is to hear from Director Johnson from the Office of Equity and Inclusion about a slate of potential new members for the Health Equity Committee. You're up.
Yes, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Leanne Johnson, and I am the Director of the Equity and Inclusion Division for the Oregon Health Authority. And yes, today I'm bringing forward three potential members for the Health Equity Committee. Just to give you a little bit of background and reminder, the committee has been in place for close to a year now, or moving on to a year. And while we started out with the 15 people that were required, because the committee has been so very, what's the word I want, ambitious in a very good way, and very much hands-on, and very much they've been meeting monthly, and for a few people that turned out to be too much of a commitment. So that's why we had a variety of resignations, and it has been a difficult to get a quorum. So I'm really pleased to bring forward three candidates today. We actually have 5 spots, but only brought 3 forward because we wanted to do full recruitment for the 2 other positions to be sure that we had opportunity to get Eastern Oregon, coastal, tribal, and be sure that we were having a broader reach across the state. So what we did is we went back to the original applicants for the committee because we had such a strong pool to begin with. And the nominating committee from the nominating committee of the Health Equity Committee went back through all of those applicants and chose 3 to bring forward. They were brought toward to the overall Health Equity Committee, And that committee has approved these 3 individuals. I've looked at them, I've approved them, and now it's up to you to pose questions, and we hope that you will also accept this recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions. The 3 candidates are right before you: Clarice Amorim Prietas, Stick Crosby, and Amala Blekic. Pardon my pronunciation on any of those, that I might have muddled up. They will be completing terms of previous members, so each will be serving a 2-year term. You can see that we were able to get some areas that we hadn't had in the previous pool. It was really important for us to find someone with a solid behavioral health, mental health, addictions, and mental health background, and we were able to do that. And also the connection to rural and data and health equity work, as is Stick Crosby, and then also the immigrant experience and the experience of people who are seeking refuge in the United States. So those were experiences that we felt were really important to bring forward to the mix of the Health Equity Committee. I want to give special thanks to Maria Castro, who worked as a primary point person and worked diligently with the Health Equity Committee to do this work. Shelley Doss, our equity manager, who also helps to oversee this work, as well as our 2 chairs, Carly Hood and Michael Navy Anderson, who have just put in hours upon hours as volunteers to do this. So I just get the privilege of reporting on the great work of a whole lot of people. Happy to answer any questions. I'm turning over to Oscar if you have any comments as our liaison.
Sure. No, I think the Health Equity Committee, particularly the chairs and the leadership from OHA, have done a really great job at moving the agenda forward. They've been tasked with a very large project from the early onset of really kind of getting themselves set up quickly and then start being able to provide input and recommendations on CCO 2.0. They've put in a lot of time and effort, and I think they're being very intentional about the committee members that they're bringing on board as well. And I really like their strategy of continuing to have 2 open seats to kind of make sure that the committee is well-rounded and representative of not just ethnic and racial diversity, but also geographic diversity as well. So I'm supportive of this, and hopefully the entire board will also approve the slate.
I'd like to draw your attention briefly to the last page. Actually, you can see we've included the entire makeup of the current committee, and then the demographic information on the last page of the Health Equity Committee documents. So that remains fairly consistent from the original 15 that were selected by all of you.
Can I just ask you, the percentages there are a percent of 13 members, is that right? Including the 3 proposed?
13 members, yes, yes. Including 3, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation?
Just make a small comment. I think Kim Irish and Wes Levitas, graduates of the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, are real grabs. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
You're going to do well by them. Yeah.
We're really pleased with the 2 of them and the entire Health Equity Committee.
Make a motion to approve.
Thanks. Is there a second? Felisa seconded. It sounds like there's your infiltration strategy is working.
We also have a physician from OHSU, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, they're good too.
Is there any other discussion on the recommendation for the motion? Thank you for the due diligence to, I think, live in and represent the kind of representation that we're that we want to see, not just with the Health Equity Committee, but really across our committee. So really appreciate seeing the intent that's gone into putting that together.
Thank you, and I just want to also say that we appreciate the support of the Oregon Health Policy Board and the fact that you're approaching this through integrating health equity, and that the committee feels very supported and feels that they are way beyond any concern about being a rubber stamp committee. They've appreciated the opportunity to come speak with the Oregon Health Policy Board to present their ideas and recommendations and feedback, and I think it's an incredible partnership. And I appreciate that we were able to arrive at this point of this partnership. So thank you very much to you, Chair Smith, and to Director Allen, and to the entire Oregon Health Policy Board, Officer Arana, for our great support in attending the meetings in the midst of a very busy schedule. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no additional discussion, all those in favor of accepting the new members for the Health Equity Committee, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, the motion passes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right. We'll jump into the meat of our work. First by hearing from Jeremy about the report that we have in front of us, additional input that we've gotten from stakeholders, and changes that we've seen between the last meeting and this one. Yes?
Yes, that's the plan. I realized we don't have the only screen is behind you, so I don't know if it's easier to follow along in your packets or not. But just so you know, there is a screen, just only some of you can see it. Okay. So the intent of this section really on the agenda is really to run through the changes since the last board meeting, and we've got a slide deck that walks through and summarizes. I'm not going to go through at sort of a red line level, but go through a sort of summary level of some of the feedback we've received both from board members and stakeholders in the public since the last meeting, and changes at a high level that we've made to the report. Depending on your questions, I may need to phone a friend or friends that come up if you have really specific questions. But we wanted to summarize it at a high level the changes since the last board meeting, and then talk about next steps, and then hopefully get approval of the report. So just a quick reminder on what this year has looked like. We now have a prettier version of this busy slide that you've seen multiple times, but we're now at the finally at the end of phase 3 of our 3-phase process, which really started with the retreat back in January, and just an incredible amount of work throughout the year. And I should just say that we recognize the amount of commitment and work that the board has had. Lots of long meetings, so hoping to give you a little bit of a reprieve to the extent we can for a couple of meetings, and then get back on a more regular schedule next year. We've been receiving public input, as you all know, throughout this process, and involving all of the policy options through different phases of public input. Since the last meeting, we received about 58 additional written comments, give or take. That might be a couple higher. We might have 1 or 2 flood-in since we sent out the slide deck. But so we've reflected. We'll highlight today where we've reflected the changes that we've incorporated in. This, I guess there might be a couple people missing depending on when their comments came in, but this is the list of folks who submitted recommending or submitted changes since the last board meeting, just so you can see some of the comments that we received. And we had 2 versions. So we had the meeting in September, the version of the September meeting. We had a public comment period for that. Then we submitted or posted online and sent out to folks an updated version on September 28th. Had another public comment period. So really, this is sort of 2 iterations later than what you saw in September. So, so for each one of these areas, we'll walk through both policy board input as well as stakeholder input. That's how we kind of, so it should be 2 slides for most of the main 4 topic areas in the governor's letter. On behavioral health, one of the biggest areas of feedback we received from the board in September was around really specifically calling out opioids. We've been talking about behavioral health generally to include mental health and substance use disorder, but received feedback around being really explicit about that and specifically calling out where things are specific to opioid use. So we've gone back and done that in some places in the report. Examples around timely access to services. When we talk about timely access to services, we're talking about both mental health and substance use disorder, as well as things like opioid treatment. We received similar feedback from stakeholders. At the last meeting, there was Dwight Holden presented recommendations from a recent DCBS report related to opioids, and we went back and shored that up with CCO 2.0 recommendations and found things to be very aligned between what came out in the DCBS report and what we had in the CCO 2.0 recommendations. So not really any substantive changes other than a call out specifically opioids in a couple of places to show that we're being intentional about that being a priority. Also received some feedback around making sure that we're aligned with the Oregon Performance Plan. This is a plan that we have to really decrease the amount of higher level institutionalization for mental health services as a part of an agreement that we came to with the U.S. Department of Justice. Again, the teams that have been working on the performance plan internally are the same teams that have been working on CCO 2.0. And so just went back and just double checked, but things are pretty well aligned, and just wanted to assure you all that we've been keeping that as a frame as we've been developing the various behavioral health policy options, which ultimately at the end of the day are intended to get people the right care in the community at the right time and decrease the amount of folks that end up in an institution.
Can I make a question on opioids? I went through it, it made perfect sense to me, but I want to make sure that by calling out opioids, we're not de-emphasizing other substances.
No, I don't think we are, and I think that's been a pretty clear priority for the governor as well.
We can speak up a little bit too.
Sure. On the cost side, some of the feedback we received since the last board meeting was related to transparency, and so we were a little more explicit about the intent. It didn't really change the policy options, but our intent here that we've been talking about in terms of better use of data to identify where there's areas of opportunity for CCOs to reduce costs, as well as to make sure that we're providing more information online to be able to easily compare performance. A lot of the information that folks have been asking for, we do create, but we probably create it in a way that's not particularly easy to find, and so making sure that as we get into 2.0 that information is more easily accessible. On the stakeholder piece, the feedback we received mostly related to the preferred drug list, which you heard a presentation on back in August. And the concerns were really around would CCOs have input in the decision making around which drugs or which drug classes we try to align, and is there a significant financial impact? We're a little bit of an awkward space going into a procurement next year of trying to figure out how we would work with CCOs to pick the first couple of drug classes while we're also going through a procurement for who the next CCOs are going to be. So, well, we would fully envision this would be a collaborative process in terms of CCOs being able to weigh in on where we should be making or prioritizing some of our alignment effort. Ultimately, the staff would make a final decision, but we would have a collaborative process through the P&T committee that would engage CCOs in that. And what we're proposing is that we start that process mid-2019 once we have applicants and selections made, even though there might be still contract negotiations at that point. I feel like we could ask the applicants to send us a representative, and we can start working on which drug classes we'll move to alignment on beginning in 2020. On the value-based payment front, can folks hear me back there? I'll try to spread my voice around. On the value-based payment front, a pretty significant change here that I wanted to call out. We have been talking for the last several meetings about starting with a 20% of primary care payments required to be in value-based payment in year one, and then a statewide average of 70% of payments by the end of the 5-year period. A lot of the feedback we received from the board and from some stakeholders as well was really around should we be thinking a little bit broader and bigger in year one. There's several comments at the last board meeting about not just focusing on primary care, but focusing on where some of the largest cost drivers are, like hospitals. So we've gone back and revised this and worked with our consultant, Michael Baylett, who felt comfortable with landing on a bit of a more stretch goal in year one of 20% of all payments, not just primary care, being an value-based payment in year one. So CCO would have to demonstrate that they, in their application process, that they will have 20% of payments and value-based payments in year one. And then by the end of the 5-year period, every CCO would be held to a 70% standard. We had been thinking about that needed to be a statewide average, but as the more we dug into it, it seemed like it just makes sense that you would hold every CCO to the same standard. In between year 1 and 5, there would still be some incremental priorities like focusing on behavioral health or children's. Some of the other feedback we received on value-based payments relates to really making sure that we're paying attention to any unintended consequences, that there's flexibility within the value-based payment models, and that we're really thinking about inequalities and making sure we aren't exacerbating disparities. So the work group that had been developing, there was a CCO work group that had been beginning to work on this earlier this year as part of our waiver, and this has been something they've been highlighting throughout that work. And we made it very clear and intentional in the report that we need to keep an eye on track, make sure that there aren't disparities. We'd be expecting the CCOs would demonstrate in their applications how they're going to be able to watch this on the ground and make sure that as we're moving from fee-for-service to value-based payments that we aren't creating new disparities or unintended consequences. And we would allow in that sort of beginning with 20% and ending with 70% flexibility for how CCOs will make this move from fee-for-service to value-based payment, with the caveat that I think this is a particular area where we really want to see market alignment as well, where we're going to, as a system, be able to move to value-based payment quicker. We can do it across PEB and OEB and the commercial market. And so flexibility, yes, but also it's really important that we have market alignment. We aren't pulling providers in multiple competing directions. I'll just also say on this, I think this is an area where states have a lot more work to do. We're really starting with sort of requiring quality payments as sort of the beginning place of value-based payment. As we get into the out years, pushing more to upside, downside risk and shared savings arrangements. There's a lot of states who are starting to think about what are all of the other components we need to have in place, from thinking about financial solvency of providers that are taking risks to consumer and patient protections. So I think this area is this is really gonna evolve over the next couple of years, and we'll be keeping a close eye on other national conversations where likely I would see some national frameworks coming out for how to regulate and keep an eye on some of this.
Yeah, I think this is great, but I wasn't here last time, but as I read it, I think it's just important to look at, well, what's the default? The default is to stay with fee-for-service, and in my mind, fee-for-service is a corrupt system that's completely inequitable. And to replace a completely corrupt system that we know to be inequitable with something better is the goal, but it's not going to be perfect. There probably will be some inequities. But, you know, I just recall in the 90s when we had a lot of tumult. Practices dissolving, and literally all the doctors going to the suburbs because they could make more money there. There were more affluent patients with more insurance coverage. And so we just need to keep in mind we're comparing to fee-for-service.
And we do have things we can monitor on a regular basis, like we have a CAP survey that we do, which surveys consumers' perspective on access. We have quality and access metrics that we can keep an eye on as well.
Can I ask about those monitoring tools, Jeremy? So I think the CAP survey, so we talk about the sort of monitoring of these things. I'm wondering, are they actually broken down by race and ethnicity?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I think the question was, are some of these monitoring tools broken down by race and ethnicity? I don't know if the CAP's off the top of my head, I believe it is, but
It is.
We have, in addition to this, which is broader than just value-based payment, I think a priority really around needing to bolster realty compliance. compliance. We just implemented a policy agency-wide that identifies 80 different databases that need to come into compliance with Realty, so that will definitely be a priority moving forward.
I think that that's important in the monitoring, because I feel like I heard from Chris when she did her presentation that this is where we could actually be increasing healthcare disparities if we are not very careful and make that a clear call out and a specific part of that monitoring.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more.
And if I remember right, the problem was really data collection. The data doesn't get in the system.
I think it was a twofold thing. There was like the data collection, and then also what happens if we're watching sort of the cherry picking behavior, or the sort of, I think what Dr. St. John was talking about, right, where we're watching people try to move people between CCOs or providers or something.
Yeah. And that was part of what I was getting at in terms of requiring the application process for CCOs to really explicitly spell out how they're going to do that monitoring on the ground, which they'll be faster at picking up on that than we will in some of our statewide measures, but I think really important, we completely agree.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I for sure think the CCO should be monitoring and looking at that work. And I also think that when they're under an intense amount of pressure to meet outcomes and goals, that the state is responsible for making sure that we're not increasing healthcare disparities. And you have to hold them accountable to that.
Sure. So Lisa said it's great that we have CCOs required to keep an eye on this on the ground, but there's a lot of competing interests, including some ambitious targets for moving to value-based payment. So it's really important that as an agency we keep a close eye on it and hold CCOs accountable for not increasing disparities as they move from fee-for-service to value-based payment.
Well, and what I heard also is ultimately that's our accountability.
Yeah. And then I think that accountability starts with data collection, compliance with data collection. And I think that we heard a lot about how hard it is, what a poor job we're doing collecting that data in terms of not educating people how to ask it.
All right, on the social determinants of health front, so there were some questions around how we would ensure that we would track progress on the proposed CCO health equity plan, and clarification needed for how healthcare interpreters would be, the use of interpreters would be increased. So we've added in the report some more specific language around monitoring the actual implementation of the equity plan. So obviously it would start with the plan, but we further increase the accountability as the years go on, including increasing use of collection or increasing collection of Realty. So that was actually added there as well. In terms of healthcare interpreter, this came up last time around a policy option that we had around providers' use of healthcare interpreters. And so we clarified what was intended. We've always intended that CCOs use healthcare interpreters and make sure people have access to language policy, their language access. There was a specific policy related to having an incentive program for providers to increase the use of that, and that's something that we don't think we're ready to go on year one, but it'll be something that we're going to continue to work on. But part of the health equity plan will include how CCOs will make sure that they're providing adequate access to interpreters and language access. From stakeholder public input, we received some feedback around making sure that we aren't overly prescriptive on the social determinants of health work, but also make sure that we're raising the bar. We agree local flexibility is really important, as well as also being very clear about the outcomes. Example of that is there might be additional data sources on the ground that might inform a community health improvement plan that we don't have as a state or every community doesn't have, and we certainly don't want to be so prescriptive that we would prevent use of the best data source on the ground for doing the social determinants of health work. We've also clarified around the importance of community partners and stakeholders, as well as tribes being included in the process of developing community health improvement plan and focusing on social determinants of health work and health equity work. And then we've also throughout the report linked back to the health equity impact assessment, which is one of the appendices to the report. On the health equity front, so we were in the final stages of the health equity impact assessment, I believe, at the last meeting. So that full assessment is now in there, as well as some, as I mentioned a minute ago, some more specific call outs where policy changes have changed to reflect the equity lens. We've talked about Real D and the importance of that in CCO 2.0. And then we also clarified that when we're talking about reducing disparities, that we also need to keep a lens on geography and things that are different in rural or frontier communities that also lead to disparities.
If I could just comment quickly on health equity as well, it's not directly part of CCO 2.0, but periodically I've talked about the performance management system that we're implementing department-wide, and a key feature of that is taking our mission, vision, and values and translating those into outcome areas and then outcome measures. How do we know whether we're delivering the things that Oregonians want us to deliver? And we have an absurdly large number of outcome measures, something like 160 or 170 outcome measures. And the reason for that is because we're trying to break out all of the health equity and disparity measures as top level measures rather than something that you kind of page, you see some sort of a performance level for all Oregonians and then have to find your way down to how does that break out. We're trying to pop that up to the very highest level so that we can see the disparities as the first thing we look at rather than something that we dig down into. And I think that really ties in directly with the work that we're trying to do here in CCO 2.0, but it's really a demonstration that we're trying to broaden that across the entire agency.
I really appreciate that. I feel like we've had a discussion over the last couple of years, and I know that CCO's pushed back on that. There's been a lot of sort of roundabout on this discussion, and so I'm really happy to see it.
Thank you.
Lisa was happy to hear what the director just said.
On the children's health front, we called out after discussion with the board 2 meetings ago around a specific, I think it was actually the last meeting, added a real specific area around children's health and tying back to recommendations that have come out of the Governor's Children's Cabinet and going out, I think really a priority of the board as well around making sure that we're focused on the next generation and make sure that we're focused on children. So we've done a sort of a crosswalk of where the specific policies are that really drive improvements in children's health.
I'd like to come back to that during the general discussion.
And then finally, on tribal consultation, we've had several, both individual tribal consultations as well as a group tribal consultation with all 9 tribes. There's a couple things that we've called out. So really specifically where I think public engagement or stakeholder engagement was referenced in here. We've tried to go back and call out really specific, calling out tribes and tribal engagement, recognizing that they're not a stakeholder. It's really a government-to-government relationship, and we really need to be intentionally involved. We've also we've got some work that's ongoing with our tribal director and some tribes to look at whether it makes sense to have a CCO tribal advisory committee, as well as we've got Consumer Advisory Council, for instance, and maybe it make more sense to have a specific tribal advisory committee for tribal issues. And then finally, some tribes brought forward an idea that we're exploring with them around creating Indian managed care entities. Something that's allowed under federal law. We're still pretty early in those conversations, but are going to be exploring moving potentially towards creating Indian managed care entities with tribes, which would be sort of like a CCO, but more specifically focused on tribal needs. So a lot more work to happen there, but that's one of the outcomes that's come from the consultation.
And Jeremy, part of what you would anticipate from that is that I can't remember the exact percentage, but a large percentage of tribal members who are on fee-for-service right now, in particular that group, would have a more direct relationship with that managed care entity potentially.
That's right. Right now, about half of folks identified as Alaskan Native American Indian are in a CCO. About half are in fee-for-service, and we have a contract with Care Oregon right now to do some care coordination for those members who are not that are not in the CCO. This would be really looking towards building a relationship directly with the tribe for their tribal members and having them do more care coordination directly.
And so will you move tribal care to 70% value-based payment?
We're really early in the conversation with the tribes, and we have a lot of details to work out.
And then what about so you have a lot of details to work out, so I was going to say, what about the tribes in the metro areas where they're not necessarily serving one shared?
Yeah, and I should say, when I say tribes, I surely should say our 9 federally recognized tribes and Urban Indian program as well.
Did you had both the Preliminary Indian Health Board and NARA participating in this?
Correct. And they they're jointly brought forward the idea of further exploration on this, which we're going to revisit with them in November. But the idea would be really standing up a direct work stream to work on this really intentionally over the next year and see if there's tribes that are interested and ready to go as early as 2020.
So you would anticipate that there's an opportunity for an update on that in 6 months or so?
Yes. Yeah, and it'll be a timeline and process that'll be completely driven by tribes and what pace makes sense for them.
Probably we could provide a brief update on what that work stream over the next year looks like early in the year, and then check in periodically on progress.
I think that'd be great. I mean, I just really appreciate that both kind of the specific clarity that you've gotten to here, and it's clear that it's both a function of engaging with the tribes directly. I also appreciate the kind of shift in language, which is really, I think, a shift in thinking about that relationship, which is clear here, and it feels like an area that would be valuable for this board to understand what that continued progress looks like.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, I think this is really interesting and exciting. My only worry is that if, the tribes aren't ready to come in next year, that they would be shut out for the next 5 years, 5+ years. So I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to sort of figure out a way, if they're not ready necessarily next year, that they don't have to wait 5 years to create something like this.
Yeah, we absolutely would not have a process where they would be shut out or stuck on it. If you're not in by 2020, then you have to wait 5 years. We've said since the outset that tribes, even if they want to apply to become a CCO, would be able to do that on a timeline that makes sense. And like I said, any managed care entity, if that's the route that a tribe or tribes ultimately go, that will be a timeline that they would be setting the pace for.
Because in effect, this is where you're negotiating with sovereign nations. It's not where you're negotiating with other stakeholders.
That's right. Yeah, I would anticipate some language in the RFA setting an expectation with CCO applicants that this could be coming at some point down the road, and you should know that. So in terms of next steps, so we will be wrapping up after today's board meeting. We'll be going back and responding to folks who submitted individual written letters. We're not going to probably respond to every single comment we received, but folks who we've got, I mentioned the 58 letters that are online. We'll be going back and responding to each one of those with feedback on how folks' comments were not incorporated into the final recommendations. We will be no longer taking sort of general public input after today's board meeting. We're going to be really starting to hit the ground running on the formal drafting the RFA and the formal procurement process that will start then. With a caveat, we are anticipating a couple of additional sort of discrete but important areas that we're going to be seeking more public input, which I'll get to in a second. After today, we really will start actually drafting the RFA. We have a team set up to start to do that. There will be a really formal question and answer process that will be launched going forward. Communications with anybody who's a potential applicant is going to be really important, are done in a way that folks who submit questions get a consistent answer and everybody gets access to the same information. So we'll be launching that process for how people can submit questions and answers fairly soon. We're going to be starting to draft administrative rules, developing procurement rates, and finalizing some of the technical details that will be coming out in the RFA. We're also going back and doing now that we're much further along in the process, going back to look to see what, if any, statutory changes are needed, and would imagine coming back and talking with the board again in November after we've completed that review of what might need to be a bill in 2019. We've got placeholders for that. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be a couple areas where we're looking for some specific input. Right now, what we've identified is some service area issues, open enrollment, how members will be assigned or transitioned, as well as issues related to what the rate development process is going to look like, which will be procurement rates, but there's a bit more level of detail that needs to happen there. I'm going to come back to the first two here for a second. We have been floating the idea around potentially having a regional approach starting this summer. We have had teams that have been continuing to dig through this internally and try to understand all the puts and takes of different ways we could do service areas. From one side of the spectrum would be how we did it in 2012, which is just wide open. Anybody can come in and apply for any region. And the other side of the spectrum would be we set up really specific regions and sort of predefine the service areas that way. There's, I think, a lot of pros and cons on each one of those. And at this point, are not looking to pursue the regional approach and look to something more like a county-based approach, but want to solicit feedback from folks before we make a final decision on that. So we're going to hold a public hearing on October 22nd and ask for any interested parties, potential applicants, advocates, others to come weigh in and let us know their feedback on how we define the service area component before we make a final decision, and then we will release pretty quickly thereafter final details on how the service area component will work, so that folks can start building networks and things of that nature. We know that potential applicants need that information so they can start building networks if they're planning to change service areas. So the meeting will be on October 22nd. We'll be pushing this out pretty soon this afternoon, I believe, or first thing tomorrow morning through a formal announcement, but it'll be Monday, October 22nd, 3 to 5 at the University of Oregon, Portland White Stag building over in Northwest. And we'll be talking both about service and soliciting input about the service area issue, as well as open enrollment and how members will be assigned. It's really important that through this process, knowing that we could have CCOs change service areas, we could have new applicants come in, that we don't disrupt continuity of care in that process. And so we want to be really deliberate in terms of thinking about how open enrollment or member transition would take place. This is the.
Are you asking for? You're not asking for input now on what path we think we should go on the area or the specific geography.
I mean, certainly if you have thoughts or input, we're happy to take those now. But we wanted to provide one more round of sort of broader public input in a formal hearing sort of way on the 22nd.
Okay, great.
And then one last look at the timeline here. So requests for applications would be posted in January. We're expecting letters of intent will be due in February before the applications are due. So we'll have a fairly early look at what the landscape looks like in terms of potential applicants. And then I believe we don't have it on here. I think we're shooting for end of March or early April for when applications are due. April to June would be a selection process. You got to build in a period for appeals and then contract negotiations in the summer, hoping that by the end of the summer, by September, we've got contracts agreed to and approved by CMS, and then are just working on transition from there till January 2020 when the new contracts start. And I'll just finally say, as I mentioned, there'll be a kind of formal Q&A process for potential applicants. These are the three places where folks should look for more information. Continue to monitor the CCO 2.0 website that we have at health.oregon.gov, and we'll be transitioning that into more information for potential applicants. The CCO 2.0 email address will still work, and also ORPN, which is the formal state procurement process website. People should keep an eye on all of those, and just know that as emails come into the CCO 2.0 email address, likely we won't be responding individually. What we'll probably be doing is collecting those and then putting out updated FAQs from time to time. That's my presentation.
Questions or comments for Jeremy?
have a discussion, as, we're gonna vote on this today?
We're gonna, yeah.
We're
So
discussing, we want a general discussion now or later before?
I would say for the moment, let's do any discussion or questions that are specifically about the kind of input process and the changes that were made. And then we'll do a bigger conversation. Jeremy, I've got one that will require a bit of an off-the-cuff answer. I appreciated the framework of identifying the changes that were made from the last session and where the inputs were. But it made me think as well about the fact that overall the report is both a, in a sense, documenting and making visible a lot of the work that's been already underway, that is a continuation. And there's been some, I think, real and significant shifts and changes that are represented in the report, but are a function of the stakeholder engagement process and what it means to be putting a real focus on this work. As you think about the report we have in front of us, where do you think this has been an opportunity to elevate some of the things that have been happening that are important to elevate in the organization and in the state? And where do you feel like there's been some real new developments as a product of this process that we've gone through?
So I'll chime in, Pat, feel free to chime in too. I think that one of the things that we learned from, I think there's a lot we learned from CCO 1.0. I think a couple things that really stand out is focus is really important. We saw CCOs really lean in and focus areas. Not surprisingly, that was areas where we attached money to metrics as an example, but you can't sort of boil the ocean. And I think as we're going into 2.0, I think clarity around what we're explicitly requiring, for instance, on the value-based payment piece, is one that has really kind of, I think this process has really allowed us to get clear about what do we actually mean about payment reform and what are we actually going to expect. It's been in statute all along. It's been a rule of our waiver. We haven't been so explicit to say this is what we're actually expecting in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I think that's an example of where we're going to be going into 2.0 with a lot more clarity than we would have otherwise. I think an area that has evolved is just to jump on Andy's comments earlier around what do we really mean by CCOs having more accountability over behavioral health. And at the end of the day, we've always been focused on really wanting to drive behavioral health outcomes, but there's always been this kind of dance of what exactly does that mean in terms of the partners that you partner with and what's that relationship have to look like. And I think we've just through conversations and soliciting feedback and having to answer those questions, I think have gotten clearer in our heads in terms of what do we expect that relationship to look like in CCO 2.0, which is kind of a balance of, we're not saying you can't subcapitate, but the CCO itself needs to be much, really needs to hold the accountability over the outcomes that the behavioral health system provides for their members on the ground.
Thanks. Anything you'd add?
The only thing I would add, just not so much in terms of an issue, but from a process standpoint, I think back to almost exactly a year ago when we were supposed to actually be moving immediately to an RFA and talking about doing a delay. And I remember getting a fair amount of finger wagging directed at us saying, well, don't just delay to delay, do something meaningful with it. And I think not only is this meaningful, but now I wish I had said 2 years instead of 1, because I think we could actually use even more time to land a lot of this stuff. But I'm just super proud of the work that our Jeremy and Leanne's teams have done in, I think, really authentically reaching out to a wide array of stakeholders, gathering some really meaningful engagement with folks and input, and I'm just really proud of this product.
You, in this meeting, I feel like you spoke to the ways in which this has shifted the relationship and potentially the approach that you use in terms of engaging our 9 tribes and then the local urban native community. In the last meeting, in talking about the meeting that was in Woodburn with the Spanish-speaking community, again, I think you spoke to how that experience shifted the way that you all are thinking as an agency about the role of engaging specifically with communities. Are there any other ways you'd highlight how, from an engagement standpoint, you feel like this has been an informative process for the agency?
Well, I think the more we can be out talking to people on the road, it's so incredibly valuable to get out of Portland or Salem and to talk to folks directly, and invariably you learn a ton, and it's just, you always walk away just feeling like, I wish I could do this all day, because there's so much happening, good work and challenges that are good to hear about. And I think every time we go through a process like this, I think we walk away going, we really need to do a lot more. We really need to do a lot more of this.
And in that vein, I'll be in Ontario next week for a community forum on Oregon Health Plan and other issues as well. And so I think we're trying to do more of that. It also helped me understand where we've got, I think, organizational shortcomings or on simple things like translation, right? You know, the number of times where we get caught a little bit flat-footed, where there are documents that we should have thought on our own to translate rather than having someone point out to us that it would be useful. Those kinds of things. So we got a lot of work to do in the equity space. And I mentioned the agency performance management plan. That's a big theme there. We passed a note back and forth a minute ago that actually bringing that performance management plan here for you guys to get some sense of the outcomes that we're tracking, the processes that we're driving, and those kinds of things would probably be a useful few minutes of your time.
Just because you know, internally, I think there's been a huge benefit to this work as well. I think that this has been really a huge cross-division, cross-team collaboration process that I think is just added a lot of benefit in terms of probably not been easy every day, but has, I think, gotten folks working together in ways that they sometimes don't unless there's a project like this. And we're hoping that some of that we can keep going as we go into the procurement and into whatever the next thing is after this. Leanne's team has been great. Maria has been in almost every meeting, and so I think we've been able to pull in experts from across the agency and get folks working together in a way that doesn't always happen unless there's a focus on a big project like this. I think the other kind of lesson learned is this is really only the second time we've gone through a full procurement for the Medicaid system like this, and so I think one of the lessons learned for us is just the amount of work that it takes to sort of stand this up, and how do we really be prepared for that when we get into CCO 3.0 and think about it both in terms of people's workload, but also in terms of not having to reinvent that structure and process. And I think there's a lot of good lessons we've learned both on the engagement side as well as just the how to manage a process like this internally that hopefully make us even better in 3.0.
I just take a few minutes both to compliment y'all, but also I realize our opportunity for input is narrowing, and so the time is now. So I became really good friends with this over the weekend. This is my best friend. I want to compliment OHA in putting this together. There's an incredible amount of brain power here, but what's really special is what you were talking about, is to see the deliberations of this board shape this, but not just this board, but the public comment that has come forward, both in terms of public comment during the meetings, but also I've been to several of the public sessions, feedback sessions, and to remember comments I've heard about traditional health workers or consumer representation, make it in here. And so you've been listening really carefully and someone's been taking really good notes. And it's really nice to see it in here. And when I went through here, I looked at this with a lens of behavioral health integration, realizing there's a lot of work that Oregon needs to do in that area. I looked at social determinants of health, especially with respect to upstream population level health. And I looked at it with a third lens, and that's around children. And I looked at it through the lens of children because we're covering half of all kids in Oregon. And I think that this is probably the most important point of intervention in terms of not only constraining costs and promoting health and well-being, but it influences every sector, and including economic development in Oregon. And I think we started paying attention to it a little bit late, about halfway through the process. And it was really nice to see the Appendix C and the work you've done to really pull this together. And I think it is 95% of there. I think you're first in goal. And I just want to push you a little bit further, try to get over the finish line. And
we've talked a
We
lot.
were watching football too this weekend, actually.
No, actually.
So then you mix the metaphor at the end there. You had me.
I'm not much of a sports fan. It's almost
We're
a
doing
home
all
run.
of that on a sailboat.
And one of the things about the kids is, I think ACEs, adverse childhood experience, are really the quintessential opportunity to intervene, both upstream at the population level and to bend the cost curve, not just for healthcare, but for society. And this is also, if they intervene on ACEs, ACEs are important because they're the one thing that absolutely occurs outside the clinic. It occurs in housing and foster care and criminal justice system, and there's so many other parts of society. And in this ACEs are mentioned, and it talks about, in policy 21, you talk about support providers' assessment of ACEs. And I don't think it goes far enough. We want providers to do more than just assess ACEs. We want to make sure that they are intervening, and that intervention is going to require cross-sector partnerships. And with criminal justice, with education, with housing and foster care. And that partnerships comes out by to see that more explicit. And this is not the role of the CCOs to fix all society's problems. And we've had some, I think, some interesting discussions at OHA and the partnership meetings about OHA's responsibility to fix all of society's problems. And I think OHA, like the CCOs are a convening body, OHA is a convening body to bring these cross-sector partnerships. And I think ACEs is could be a real organizing principle to start these cross-sector interagency discussions. When you're in 21, talk about an increased level of outpatient care for 0 to 5-year-olds, which is really important. But what does that increased level of care mean? Does it shouldn't mean just more medications for ADHD or other issues. It's going to be really, these are really tough levers to pull. And also to recognize that 0 to 5 is a sweet spot, but ACEs don't stop at 5. And certainly the effects of them don't stop at 5. And so make sure that we're talking about the entire lifespan. I like policy 24 that requires CCOs to ensure a care coordinator for individuals with severe mental illness and emotional disturbances in kids. That's, I think, is important, but also that care coordination is going to be a really important piece of that cross-sector interagency navigation, and to include ACEs as part of severe mental illness and emotional disturbances, not just to focus on the most severely disabled kids. And then some of this is addressed in policy 27 about wraparound services, but what is a wraparound service? And, we're almost there, but just to have the group sort of go through those, and I think just push it a little bit further across the finish line, the goalpost, home run, would just make a real, I think, a real lasting, contribution to, leading this effort to bend the cost curve to improve health and well-being of kids across the lifespan, and then for really push OHA and the CCOs to begin these interagency discussions of criminal justice, foster care. But really well done. Thank you.
Thanks. Want to make a general comment?
Yeah, I think in the interest of, or in the spirit of what Dr. Bangsberg was doing, here's what I want to suggest, that we'll give some additional input to both where we are and to the report. That can both look like, as it did, it can look like comments about the process that got us here, but also about the content that's in the report. Before we do that, I just want to acknowledge, this report really represents a couple of different things. One, in a very tangible way, it in effect represents the response that this board will provide to the governor into the letter that she sent to us over a year ago. So as we think about what we're doing today, one of the things we'll do is take action on whether or not the report is such that we want to be able to send it back to the governor's office. Secondly, I think it, as we've talked about, it really outlines both existing work of the agency as well as some real new developments around how we want to see the coordinated care organizations fit into the health transformation work of the state as we move forward. And in that way, I think it's the beginning of, in many ways, a work plan in a lot of ways. I mean, the detail that's included in these different recommendations or recommended policies really begins to articulate what a timeline might need to look like, and I think it gives stakeholders an opportunity to respond to the degree to which we're in agreement around what that looks like. So as we move towards some votes here, I think it does make sense for us to do some general discussion first, and then to consider the report specifically as an action step for the board. Does that make sense? Feel all right? Great.
Yeah, well, as it relates to the report, I think it's terrific, and what concerns I had have been addressed, and I'm really supportive of the report. So
John?
I'll vote yes. But I'm a strong believer in the next vote is always the most important vote, and this one's done. And so I think this does set the stage for the next votes. And certainly there's going to be votes around equity, and I think this body kind of owns some of that, and that's great. And I think data is going to be important. I personally think there's going to be some votes around cost, and I'm not quite certain we've still got the tone around costs right. I read Director Allen's email, so costs are up, but not on all the CCOs. And for the first time, it was great to read a report. Well, some of the CCOs are figuring it out. Well, how are they doing that? And from a cost point of view, my own bias is, I don't want to really hear, well, for one reason or another, we got bad selection. We got sicker folks. No, because I'm a believer that the system generally is overusing, and overuse causes bad outcomes. In my own mind, the opioid mess is an overuse mess. It's an economic model that encouraged incredible marketing of an addictive drug. It's why we just can't keep doing that. And that's what CCOs eventually have to figure out an answer to. That economic business model is just not going to work. And I think the degree that we can assist with that discussion. The third thing is, I think it will be very interesting what happens at CACs now if information about CCO performance is more easily available and understandable. So what will a CAC advise or say when their CCO is struggling from a cost point of view, but others aren't? And how will that be presented to them? And how will they be, if you will, staffed so that they have an understanding of those issues? So I think there's a whole bunch of interesting next votes that are on the horizon that this sets up. So I feel very good about it.
Other general thoughts about the report?
I think that, so I want to echo some of the things that have already been said, and I actually think that the report is good and in-depth, and I feel like does address some of the concerns we heard from CCOs and the concerns we heard from the board on moving forward on these issues. I really appreciate, I feel like I think that the policy, what is it, number 8, I think it's the chip and the jaw policy, the chip, the jaw policies, where I feel like, I think it's a real meaningful step in how we integrate the healthcare system with public health in a very different way, which I think we've been talking about from the beginning of this process, but really this is like much more concrete than it's happened before. I appreciate everybody keeping the prize on the equity in this discussion. I think it's been difficult, and I know that makes people uncomfortable because we have to admit we have a problem. So I think it's really good that we sort of move forward on that and have some stuff to move forward on that.
I would agree on the front that
John is talking about when it comes to cost, and I think it's a different conversation when we talk about Medicaid. But I feel like we spent the last 2 years or 3 years really focusing on Medicaid, and I think we've lost a little bit of sight of on the board, and I get that we have to do CCO 2.0. I just want to encourage us that when we're moving forward, we have to think about the healthcare system of the state, and that is not Medicaid, and Medicaid only. And so some of these principles and proposals, we can drive as much as we can with a Medicaid system, but we have the responsibility of healthcare for all Oregonians, and we should be taking these principles and applying them to commercial and group markets where we really can turn the needle, because we're not going to turn the needle on cost with Medicaid alone. And we're not going to take on entrenched pharmaceutical industries or other industries with Medicaid alone. And so I feel like, how do we do that?
the other piece here that I felt like, which I appreciate, the other piece here I felt like was missing a little bit, was just our continued commitment to access. So when you look at the values statement that this starts with, and all of the principles in here, I think that as we move forward, we're going to continue to have to ask this question because of the national environment. Do we still believe that every Oregonian should have health care in our state? The attacks on the Affordable Care Act are not over, and we're going to continue to see them coming. And so I feel like reaffirming that commitment that we believe every Oregonian should have access to health care should be in every single thing that we're putting forward as a group. And I think we hinted that in the values, but it's not one of the ones that are specifically called out. And so, but overall, I feel like this is, I think since I started in the CCO 1, I guess is what we would call it, just CCO, the creation of CCO, to like here now, I feel like we have this really grand experiment and we have really great ideas that I think are starting to come to fruition. And I just don't want to lose sight of like that. And having traveled around the state, and it started with those original community meetings and the original meetings in places like Astoria and other places where folks were so, I think leading a little bit with fear and trepidation about change, to coming back around and hearing all of the amazing things that people are doing to actually improve the health of some of the lowest income Oregonians, not some of the lowest income Oregonians in our community. And I think it's amazing. And I feel like there is this level of freedom that comes with uncertainty that I think large systems tend to be resistant to, but has really paid off in their innovation and their creativity to serve those groups. And I think some of these policies, I think we're going to hear the same pushback around, and we've heard some of the same pushback around. And I just think how excited I am for that next like 5 years of that creative uncertainty and what's going to come here, because we're already watching Medicaid patients get healthier. We're already watching their care be coordinated better. Nobody has come before this board in, I think, a very long time to talk about how sick their patients are and how they can't deal with how sick their patients are. They talk about the other issues like housing and the wraparound services and other things like that. And this is great. And so I feel really optimistic and excited.
Thanks, Felisa. I feel like if we had some way of doing like giving you an opportunity to talk over in a corner for a minute, because you warm up and then it's like we can hear you.
Well, I realized that when you were looking at me that I needed to start shouting, and so this is like my shouting.
Is your outdoor voice?
Thank you for shouting. I wonder, Dr. McKelvey, is there any comments that you have at this point?
No, I just appreciate the opportunities that we've had to make comments ahead of the meeting, and the thoughtfulness that has gone into this, as well as the amount of work. So it's very, very impressive, and it's been a great honor and opportunity to be part of it. So.
Thank you.
I also commend the work. It's been such a privilege to be part of it. I've never seen a process quite like this, where the inclusion of such a diverse vantage point and so many different opinions and perspectives have developed in such a way over time. So big kudos, really. I also want to remind us, I think similar to what Dr. Santa was speaking to, is to expect resistance, to expect that there are flaws in this particular product that we're delivering, and how we want to navigate, both as a board, as a state, with that resistance, and often I think it comes from places that we may not anticipate it despite our best efforts. So I know that there have been times where we've talked about, are we a collaborative entity with the CCOs themselves? Are we holding our role and responsibility as a regulatory authority over, kind of the contractual obligations and performance measures and that kind of stuff? And I think that there's, I've watched us sort of vacillate between what is our perspective, what's our position in that very relationship. And I don't know that there's an extreme on one side or the other that would necessarily be effective, but just kind of wanted to give voice to the notion of constantly staying the path, to both expecting the resistance and knowing when to back off and pace differently, or knowing when to push forward. My question, I guess, back to you perhaps, Jeremy, is to say, in the report itself, are we anticipating areas of resistance that will fundamentally change the RFA process between now and the end of the year? Are there things that we're anticipating we might hear in either the service area issue, or the PDL discussion, or things like that that have kind of been a little more hot topic like that we need to think about over the next several months before we get final versions to January?
Let me give it a shot. I think no, in terms of general overall direction, in terms of policy goals, I think we kind of have, this is sort of setting the frame of where we're headed. But I would say, I think as we get into actually drafting the RFA, one of the things we're trying to be really clear about in 2.0 is making sure we're really clear about how are we going to hold CCOs accountable, and are we really clear about the outcomes that we're trying to get. And it might be that we get into a couple of these, and as we try to actually put pen to paper, say, actually we got a little bit more fleshing out we need to do, and this really maybe needs to wait another year. I could anticipate that potentially happening. But I think in terms of seeking more input, I think we're kind of at the end of that process here. But I would say overall, this is, I would think of this as a living document. I mean, I can imagine a scenario where any of this is hard and fast for 5 years, because when I look back at the last 5 years, every year has looked vastly different depending on whatever else is going on, and you never know. I mean, that there could be another committee somewhere that comes up with some great ideas that helps us tackle ACEs, and we say we want to come back and think about that issue. So I think this really sets the road ahead. But I would imagine that over the next 5 years, there's definitely going to be things that are going to change and evolve, and we'll want to be fluid in that.
But in terms of process, isn't that window for resistance closing that you're about to start drafting?
Yeah. I don't think it's a window of resistance that will ever close. I think there will always be something, and the question, I think, is, have we been really thoughtful in anticipating exactly the ones that we know about, and how we're going to pivot and move with them, or the ones that come in sort of kind of T-bone it unexpectedly, and there we are sort of addressing a one-off that, anyway.
As people start writing the contracts, writing
Yeah,
a proposal,
and
they
now
say, we can't
wait
do
a
that,
minute.
that's crazy.
Well, and the structure that we've set up of year one and not year one, right,
Yeah.
with the pile of things that
Right.
we work on initially, I think sets up sort of an ongoing
Cadence.
evaluation process that says, all right, we've done these things and they're there now, and now we've got some capacity. What do we promote into the current year, whatever the current year is?
I would say too that one of the things I really appreciate about the layout of the report is that you've got this initial section that is in effect responding to the governor, but says in each of these areas, here's a vision, here's a set of considerations. I would expect for the most part that vision should actually be very malleable.
Right.
And that most of the input that we needed to create that vision, we've got. And at least in terms of whether these are considerations, those things don't really change much either. There may be new considerations which become visible to us in the process that we'll need to take into consideration. And then as we get into the specific policies, that is a place where where it's still work to be done, where this is kind of best estimation about both what should we be prioritizing first and what are some critical strategic decisions in relation to each of those policies that we're willing to put kind of a stand on at this point in time. But as we move into implementation, that you might see that there are a number of those places that either the timeline is wrong and or the specific decision point might actually also be something that needs to still be considered. And I think as we think about it, you know, having that framework of like, I don't want OHA coming back in a month and saying, well, actually we think the vision around sustainable cost growth is off a little bit. We need to think about it differently.
Right.
Like we should be at a place where we can actually say this is clear. That's part of why we're going to getting this back to the governor to say we believe these truths. These are really important for us as we think about what we want the future to look like. And then there's a great question, I think, for us as we move forward about what's the process for us to be continuing to both monitor and push on the policies to make sure that they're either moving at the pace they need to and coming online effectively, or that we reconsider where we need to reconsider some things in order to make sure we're staying true to the vision that we've set in each of these places, which all gets back to what Felisa was talking about in terms of a bigger vision. Some of the places that we did put some emphasis on here, and some places we didn't, and we may need to consider where we're looking at that too. So I just appreciate that from a report standpoint, but I think it speaks to what you're really talking about, Brenda, and I really appreciate that this is, in effect, still a living document. It should be. We're not in any way, I don't think, presupposing that these are, you know, that we just, what is it, 46, that we've got 46 new policies that have to be in place tomorrow. Obviously, it's not set up that way, but that there is, at the same time, some very clear, more intentional and sustainable statements and clarity and focus that's here than we had before.
I think I just have one more thing. I think I really appreciate the comments around kind of what's next after this. I think, you know, we would love to be able to really pick up off of learnings from this year and think about what are the, you know, 1, 2, 3 things the board really wants to dive into in 2019, and look forward to having some of those conversations with you between now and the retreat, and hopefully the retreat can land on what does 2019 hold in terms of where the board wants to focus.
I'm glad you delayed a year. I think a year was just the right time. If you had proposed 2 years, I would have been upset. I think this is where it needs to be right now.
So I'll echo a lot of the comments that have already been mentioned around the table. I think it's been a very impressive process to be a part of over the last year, and I really want to congratulate the leadership team for leading such a robust community engagement process with the surveys and the stakeholder interviews, and even reaching out to culturally specific populations. Really want to also congratulate Director Johnson for all of her work, and her team and the Health Equity Committee for their involvement. It's been really fascinating to see what a letter from the governor that, you know, sort of prioritized 4 areas turn into this very robust plan that's now more than 200 pages with more than 40 policies as well to sort of try to implement. I think one of the areas where I would love to see as we move forward, particularly next year and maybe even in the RFA process, is around housing, and particularly as a social determinant of health. I think there's definitely areas in the report that do call out housing as a major area to focus on. But I think that I would love to see a little bit more connection between OHA and the Oregon Housing Community Services strategic plan as well, because I do think that there's going to be some overlap there in terms of opportunities for more affordable housing, not just particularly in rural areas as well. So yeah, I think just looking at the strategic plan for OHCS and seeing where there might be a little bit more of a connection would be great.
Do you need a runway? Or
I'm
use your
just
shouting
gonna
voice?
shout. I'm gonna shout. Sounds terrible. I didn't realize that until I got here. Sorry. So I'll talk to anybody in the morning, I guess. I feel like the other piece of the next step work, I would like to see us do a little bit more integration with the DHS team. And I think we've done some good work with our early learning folks and some good work with other folks, but I feel like the DHS team really gets to these bigger, broader social determinants of health too, and I feel like they're dealing with a crisis. I want to be really clear, I know they're dealing with a crisis at a whole other level right now, but I feel like how can we partner as a board to help address that crisis that's sort of impacting, because I think when the CCOs are talking about the social determinants of health, a huge part of that is the crisis that DHS is dealing with not only children, which has been in the news overwhelmingly, but also the adult DHS population. And I think we're going to see this boom of this crisis continue with seniors as people age. They have less in retirement money, and we're an older state. So how do we get ahead of that right now? And that includes, I feel like, talking about Medicare in a different way. So since I'm just like, I'm leaving the board soon, so now I'm just gonna throw out everything I want you guys to do, and I don't sit here anymore.
Medicare next year.
Can someone summarize it, please? I can't.
This seems real freaking hard, so do this.
So
this is real shitty and hard. How about this? We should work on this.
I want to, I think we should move and then take action on the report. There's two other things I want to do after that, just to signal for you. One is I think it would be helpful to do a little bit more about what we think are some next steps on the work, the CCO 2.0 work that we are interested in, Jeremy and Pat and the team kind of coming back and sharing a little bit with us and discussing what that process might look like. And then the second thing is I want to ask you all what you think are, to this point that Felice is making, some of the key areas that we might put a focus on in the next year. We'll do a deeper conversation about that at the retreat. I think at the retreat in January, the idea would be that we'll get clarity about what our priorities are and then how that helps to shape what the course of the work is for us over the year at least. But I think it might be helpful now to get, as we're in this space, to get kind of a brainstorm set of ideas on the table. And I've written down a few from the conversation we've been having. So we'll come back and do both of those pieces. But first I want to kind of open the floor for a motion around this report and its role as a response to the governor. Is there anyone who has a specific motion they would like to make?
I move to accept CCO 2.0 as presented today.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. Is there any discussion on that?
I think that just, if I could forward some notes I made in terms of the specific policies, and I trust OHA, to look at it and see, okay, what makes sense to sort of push forward some of the comments I made. I think with that, I'm happy to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, that's a good point too. I was thinking, I didn't quite say this clearly a minute ago, but so in effect we have a report and then we have a set of appendices, right? And if we were thinking about this as a contract and a set of appendices, the appendices are you can make changes without having to come back and reapprove the entire report, right? So, or contract. So we might think of it as...
So the appendices are still fluid?
I don't know that I would want to use the word fluid.
I guess I don't want to use yes.
But because I think we are trying to kind of codify a moment in time. But I don't think we want to have to come back and do a final adoption beyond today, which would incorporate some of the input. Feels fine to me. I mean, but I'm interested in other people's thoughts. That if you want to forward that to Jeremy, if people have other specific thoughts that are about things that are in the appendices, that there might be some movement there as long as the spirit and the intent stays the same.
I mean, I think the appendices are really well done and, you know, complete, and just we're really fine tuning a few things. Yeah, so I'm happy to move forward with the whole shebang.
Great. We might also benefit from, just because, a kind of a slight amendment to the motion, which would also say that we would then be forwarding this with some sort of a cover to the governor's office, which I can't remember whether I can
accept that
myself or
amendment.
not. Great.
As well.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion on the report? Really, I mean, said a lot, but just want to acknowledge again the amount of work and effort that lots and lots of people at the Oregon Health Authority and in partner and stakeholder organizations have put into this process, and that shows up in the report. So thank you all for that. All right, all those in favor of accepting the CCO 2.0 report and forwarding it to the governor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, please say nay or no. Motion passes. Great, thank you. Good product, good work. So, two quick things, maybe two things. One, is there any other input for Jeremy or the team about next steps coming out of the CCO 2.0 process? I have a thought. So Jeremy, you mentioned that you wanted to come back in November with some more clarity about where we may need action from the legislature to support work that's in here. That feels like it's a really important piece. I'm also really interested, I mean, I know that a lot of the agency's effort is going to be focused on the procurement process. I'm assuming you're going to give us some clarity about kind of rules of engagement during that period in November. That would be great for us to understand as a board. But I'm also really interested in the continued ways that the agency will move this work outside of the procurement process. I think that's both probably a function of ways the agency is shifting how it does business. You alluded to some of that coming out of this, but I also know that there are some places here where the agency can do some work that's outside of the procurement process. It'd be great to get, I think, an update on what you see as those different tracks of work and where the board needs to engage in that process along each of those lines.
I was just going to mention, part of this process included things that the agency can be doing outside of just the procurement. So two areas that we're going to be getting underway right away is one was the recommendation around looking at behavioral health billing codes and doing an evaluation of things we could be doing to try to improve that system. We want to try to get that done before the launch of the next contract, so that work's going to get underway. And the other one we're looking at is one of the original recommendations that John McConnell had made was around a one-stop shop for technical assistance around health-related services, which I think really is the transformation center. We've done some work there, but we want to bolster the amount of work in terms of finding out what the challenges are for lack of investments, where there have been lack of investments in health-related services, and how we can put out guidance or provide technical assistance to try to bolster that in CCO 2.0. So those are some things that will be, independent of the RFA, will be moving forward now.
Jeremy and I haven't talked about this, but the other piece that we're going to need to, in 2019, begin thinking about in terms of engagement and information gathering is the next waiver, because it'll actually be time to start doing that work.
Great. Yeah, that feels really important, and that there's some real opportunity there. Are there other thoughts, CCO 2.0? Either what we want to hear back from Jeremy and or things you want to make sure we're flagging to
I'm sorry, what was the important thing that Pat just leaned over and whispered everybody wants to know? What was the...
Oh, I'm sorry, I said it'll be time to start working on the next waiver.
Waiver. How long does that...
CCO 3.0.
I guess it's an important thing.
How long does that take?
Well, our work with CMS took the better part of a year in terms of dealing with them. I think for us to approach that work with the same sort of community engagement rigor that we have this time means you need to pretty much stack up another year in front of that to get to a place where we know what we want to ask for effectively.
Yeah, our current waiver expires in June
2022, and I'd say it's a full 2-year process if you want to do it right in terms of really clearly building out what you're trying to achieve and making the case, and then at least a year of negotiation with CMS once you actually submit the application. So yeah, oddly we're not that far off.
And that negotiation process may be with 2 different administrations. Other thoughts about CCO 2.0? Next steps? One other one, Jeremy, just I think to that point of the, it'd be great for the staff to think about how they want to engage with the board in some sort of a kind of progress monitoring process over time, including all of the different pieces, even the programming process.
Yeah, I think we've been so focused on CCO 2.0, and we want to come back, take a look at the action plan.
Yep.
We're also going to be doing some strategic planning from an agency perspective. So I think we can figure a way to pull these together, I think, and figure out what level of detail the board wants moving forward in terms of monitoring. I think one I don't need to answer the question today, but one bug I'd kind of put in your ears, we've been really focused on Medicaid this year through this process, and are there some things out of the 2.0 process that are broader than Medicaid that the board will want to focus on next year? There's things like value-based payment or cost where, maybe thinking about what does a policy look like broader than just Medicaid. So I think chewing in between now and the end of the year on kind of what some of those things could be in 2019 would be really helpful.
I can't imagine a discussion around Medicaid in the next year, not starting with now. Tell us in CCO 2.0 language where this issue was in 2.0, what's happened since. So I know I would just base almost everything on this language, these policies. So, and like, well, what if you said it? Well, it goes back to policy 8. I'd ask, well, what metrics are you following for policy 8 or 22 or 27? Can you show us those metrics? And
so a couple things that came up in the report conversation that might fit into that frame. A few different ways. I think there's this idea of focusing on children and being really clear about how our systems are improving health for children. It also came up in the Felisa mentioned the DHS conversation, not just about children, obviously, but that there's an opportunity there for us to have a real focus on a population or on a couple of populations, maybe including elder population as well. It has come up a few times around cost, and we know that the healthcare cost review task force that met is recommending a cost growth limit 3.4% across the entire system, not just for CCOs, and potentially that the Health Policy Board becomes a body for moving forward on some policy recommendations that would come out of that process about how to create that kind of alignment. Felisa raised this, kind of brought our attention to the fact that we have been really focused on Medicaid and that we have a responsibility to be thinking about the healthcare system as a whole. There might be some specific ways that we want to actually do that. And then Oscar had raised the issue of the relationship to housing as a prioritized social determinant of health and how we might move the system more there. Are there other things, and again, this is intended as a bit of a brainstorm so that staff can incorporate some of these ideas into our thinking, along with some of the things that Jeremy mentioned around priorities that the agency might take for the retreat in January to help frame what our work might look like over the next year. This year's been really, really focused on CCOs in a way that made a ton of sense, and there may be some other areas that we want to put some attention to. Other things that jump out for folks as ideas to frame where we strategize our work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a couple things. This Universal Coverage Group has been talking about Medicaid buying, and I think that's an interesting idea, especially for like gaps and cracks. How much would it cost a person who's 64 and is losing their Medicaid eligibility, to buy 6 months or 1 year of Medicaid coverage to get them to Medicaid. My guess is it would be interesting for that to be included in a waiver, or either the next one or a separate one. I didn't want to bring it up before the vote, but I noticed that in the bullets, there are 6 bullets for the vision of CCOs. There was a statement about accountability and transparency, and it included prices, which is interesting. HB 4005 is all about the pricing and the supply chain, and to the degree the CCOs would work, constructively and all around those pricing issues for drugs and potentially for other sorts of things. I don't think that it's a 2.0 issue. Too late for that. But that's interesting. And I think there will be more out of HB 4005. And then frankly, I wonder about administrative costs. And are there opportunities for CCOs and OHA to do things as the relationships evolve to reduce administrative costs for both parties? Because I think that's a cost area that very few patients are going to object to.
This conversation is just reminding me to take a closer look at the long-range calendar for the board's work, and I think I'll go back and look at that, given the context that you're laying out for us about how methodically we can plot really strategic conversations during 2019 that may not be thinking about quite yet.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think both looking at where there's items that we frankly don't have a ton of control over, but they're going to come to us and they're going to come to us. What gaps that leaves for us to be able to have some of those strategic conversations. And maybe in addition to the content, also thinking about what do we want, how do we want to engage in those conversations. We've engaged differently in the CCO 2.0 process than we did previously. And there may be for us as well some real lessons there about what we want to do moving forward.
I think we'll also make sure we do, whether it's me or we might see if Diane Bianco is available again, try to do some one-on-one conversations with board members and just make sure we're getting your input in terms of how things are working, and as well as thoughts in terms of 2019 agenda.
One of the themes I've heard today, I would certainly like to learn more about what type of levers we have over the commercial market. I think that was an excellent idea. And also, I think in terms of strategic planning, what are our touch points and what is the relationship between OHA, criminal justice, housing, WIC, and how do we structure those conversations in order to really support the progress that we put forward here? We need some governor guidance on that.
Yeah, we might be open to new guidance. Any other thoughts?
Got a couple if I could.
Yeah.
I would add to the list to think about health equity and health disparities more broadly. I think it would be very useful to us if that continued to be a significant focus of the board, partly as an accountability mechanism, because the issue is much broader than just CCO 2.0, and it needs to be a major focus for us. Behavioral health system in general, and then particularly addictions and recovery. The Alcohol and Drug Policy Council is going to be working on a work plan, and I think that's going to have major legislative focus during the next session, although their plan will be out during session. But I think that's an area where there's going to be a lot more opportunity than there has been. And then I think sort of the issue of access generally, and whether that means access in terms of, getting from 94% coverage to 100% coverage, or access meaning what kinds of providers are available in what kinds of communities, or access in terms of culturally relevant services and those kinds of things. I think this general notion of it's great that we've got a financing mechanism, how do people actually get care? right? Would be another one that I would probably add to the list.
Great, thank you. And I think too, you know, as I said, this is, I think, a brainstorm to inform what our retreat looks like, but it's a great time for us to get more on the table than we'll actually have the ability to engage around, so that we can then do some narrowing and focus. Dr. McKelvey, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think a lot of what my thoughts were have been verbalized by my colleagues there. I think it's really important just for us to continue to ensure that we have processes in place to do oversight, to track and see how things are going, and what is working, what are unintended consequences. So being able to just have a mechanism in place to continue to get feedback from the organizations and the people that are going to be doing all of this great work.
I just want to make a pitch for the continued workforce development too. I think we have a committee that's on track, but that will take decades, frankly, to accomplish the work that we need. And so there's no point where we can stop or sort of lay off that work in any way. So any plans that come forward, I feel like has to have that component. Otherwise, we'll just fall behind.
Carla, she was specifically calling out the workforce development work in case you didn't hear it. Both, she acknowledged the great work of the committee, but said we've got to keep a focus on it as a board, given the importance of it over time. Did I characterize that well?
Thank you, Felisa. I can hear you every so often. It sounds like you're quite sick, so thank you for being there.
I might just put a call out to board members. It's been a few months since we've had a more robust look at the committee work, even though there's been some really significant work that has continued to move. So maybe at our next meeting, we might take a little bit more time for liaisons to share with us both what's been moving and what the implications are of that as we move forward. That could also actually help inform the retreat and some of what we want to make visible moving forward. Any other thoughts about what we should be paying attention to? Okay, I think I'll just call out, I think the intent, it is intentional that this meeting and at least the next one may be slightly shorter than our typical amount of time. That's both an acknowledgement from staff that we, but also they, have been putting a lot of time and energy into the CCO process. And over the last 6 months, we've spent more than 4 hours on average a month working as a board together. I think it's also will give a little bit of space for the staff to be able to work towards ensuring that our retreat really is focused and that we can accomplish what we need to there. Jeremy, I really appreciated the call out of either you and or Deanna coming back and individually asking board members about where they're at and what they see as opportunities moving forward. Looking forward to that retreat. Our next meeting will be back at the OHSU Center for Health and Healing. As I said, it's still there. I saw it this morning. That's on November 6th, and it's from 8:30 to 12. This meeting is almost adjourned. Did you want to say something?
Tuesday? Is it we're going back to Tuesday?
That is a Tuesday. This was a special meeting. It was on a different date and time. Thanks for accommodating. This meeting's adjourned.
All right, thank you.